All right, so today we're jumping into the final chapters of the Jacob story in Genesis. And let me tell you, it's a wild ride. We're talking about a story of major transition, a really shocking moral freefall, and, maybe the most surprising part, God's incredible faithfulness even when people are at their absolute worst. So, yeah, let's get into it.
So, picture this. Jacob has finally made it. After all those years of running and struggling, he's had that big, tense reunion with his brother Esau. And he's back home in Canaan. You'd think, okay, peace at last, right? Nope. The real danger, the biggest threat, isn't coming from some outside enemy. It's about to explode from right inside his own family.
Okay, Section 1, a family at a crossroads. So, we start out with Jacob's family seemingly at a pretty good place. He settles down near the city of Shechem, he actually buys a piece of land, he even builds an altar. I mean, from the outside it looks like things are finally stable. It looks like the patriarch is setting up his legacy in the promised land.
But here's where things get really interesting, because the story itself starts to change. It's not just about the big-name patriarchs anymore, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. The focus is actually shifting. The camera, so to speak, is panning over to the next generation, Jacob's 12 sons. They are the future of Israel, and this chapter, well, it's about to show us exactly what that future is going to look like.
Which brings us to our next section, descent into deceit and violence. And boy, does it descend fast. That future we were just talking about, it kicks off with an absolute catastrophe. Jacob's only daughter, Dinah, is brutally violated by a local prince, a guy named Shechem. And this one horrific act is the spark that ignites this total firestorm of revenge and deceit that's just going to consume the entire family.
So Shechem's father, a guy named Hamor, he comes to Jacob to try and smooth things over. And he makes this offer, which you can see right here. On the surface, it sounds pretty generous, doesn't it? Let's intermarry, you can live here, the land is open to you. It almost sounds like a peace treaty, but it's not. For Jacob's family, marrying into the local idol-worshipping peoples was the fastest way to lose everything. Their identity, their special covenant with God. This wasn't an offer of peace, it was an offer to just be absorbed, to disappear.
So Jacob's sons fire back with a counteroffer, and they base it on this incredibly sacred tradition. They say, okay, you want to join our families? Fine. But first, all your men have to adopt the sign of our covenant, circumcision. Now, you have to understand, this was way more than just some physical act. This was the holy, sacred symbol of God's promise to Abraham. It marks his descendants as a people set apart for a divine purpose. It's a huge deal.
And this is where we see just how far they've fallen. They take this sacred sign and they turn it into a weapon. It's just horrifying. Let's just walk through their twisted plan. Step 1, they demand all the men get circumcised. Step 2, they sell it to the Shechemites as a brilliant business move, promising everyone will get rich and powerful. Then, step 3, they wait. They wait for 3 days until the men are sore, sick, and completely defenseless from the procedure. And then, step 4, they attack the city and slaughter every single male. They turned a holy rite into an instrument for mass murder. It's just unthinkable.
So what about Jacob, the patriarch, the leader? What's his response to all this? Well, it's really telling. There's no moral outrage. He doesn't condemn his sons for the massacre. It's just fear. You've brought trouble on me, he says. He's just worried that the neighbors are going to team up and wipe him out. His only concern is saving his own skin. It's a total failure of spiritual leadership, right when it was needed most.
And that brings us to Section 3, God's unfailing promise. So, let's recap. The family is at rock bottom. They're morally bankrupt, they're violent, they're liars, they're totally isolated. I mean, by any and all logic, they should be toast. They should be destroyed. But this is where the story takes this incredible, sharp, unexpected turn. Because right here, in their darkest moment, God steps in.
And what happens next is just amazing. Take a look at this contrast here. On the one side, you've got Jacob's fear. I and my household will be destroyed. He's convinced they're done for. He's just waiting for the payback. But then look at God's action. Instead of letting Jacob's worst fears come true, a terror of God falls on all the towns around them. Nobody even tries to chase them. Think about that. God protects this deeply broken family not because they deserved it, they absolutely didn't, but because he made a promise.
And God doesn't just protect them, he redirects them. He tells Jacob, I want you to go back to Bethel. Now, if you remember the story, Bethel is the exact spot where decades ago, when Jacob was a young man running for his life, he first received God's promise. This is a full circle moment. God is basically saying, let's go back to the beginning,
Let's remember the covenant that this is all built on.
Section 4. An era ends, a new one begins. So this whole journey back to Bethel, it becomes this big moment of hitting the reset button. It's about purification and transition. Before this new era of the 12 tribes can really start, the old era, with all of its junk and baggage, it has to be put to rest, symbolically speaking.
And we see this happen through a series of 4 burials. It's really powerful. First, Jacob takes all the foreign idols his family has collected and he buries them. He's literally purifying his household. Then we have a series of deaths of key people from the past. There's Deborah, who is his mother Rebekah's nurse, a link to the past. Then Rachel, his beloved wife, dies giving birth. And finally, his father, Isaac, the last of the old guard patriarchs, dies. Each one of these burials is like closing a chapter, clearing the stage for what's coming next.
So when they get back to Bethel, God appears one more time. He reconfirms all the covenant promises, and he reconfirms Jacob's new name, Israel. And this is the crucial moment. The transition is officially complete. The age of the patriarchs is over. From here on out, the future belongs entirely to the sons of Israel.
So that brings us to the big question, right? Section 5. Why this dark story matters. Why is this absolutely horrifying story of deceit and violence and total moral failure recorded in the Bible in such detail? What on earth are we supposed to get from this?
It really forces us to ask this deep, difficult question. How can God's promise possibly be fulfilled through a family that is so deeply, deeply broken and sinful? We just watched the guys who were supposed to be the future leaders of Israel act like absolute monsters. How can a holy God build his chosen people out of this?
And this is the profound, incredible answer. The story is in here to prove a point. God's plan succeeds not because of how good people are, but in spite of how bad they can be. His faithfulness isn't some reward for our good behavior. No, it's this powerful force that actually overcomes our wickedness. The promise gets fulfilled in spite of who they are, not because of it.
And that brings us to this final thought from the Psalms, which I think just perfectly captures the heart of this entire story. If you, Lord, kept a record of sins, Lord, who could stand? But with you, there is forgiveness. In the absolute darkest hour of this family's story, when it looks like everything is lost to sin and violence, the final message isn't about judgment. It's about a relentless pursuing grace. And it kind of makes you think, if there's hope for them, well, maybe there's hope for any of us.